I could go on and on about how I don't like that the art world makes a valuation call on the size of your edition. So if you have an edition of 100 units and then after that they say, oh, you're devalued. But look at the best-selling authors on the New York Times. I mean, they're celebrated for selling millions. Musicians went platinum, went gold. They're celebrated for their volume. But an artist has to eat on this, and I think it's a crock. I remember that sometimes in jobs I would just go and go and go, adding more and more quality, but the price didn't go up. I had already bid the job, but it was just my internal madness that wanted to make it perfect and beautiful and this, that. And I was just like, every step towards perfection is costing me, you know, another $20, another $20, another $20. And I got to the point where I thought my good enough was better than someone else's best. And I just had to realize that. It sounds kind of arrogant, but in every craft that a person becomes a master of, I don't know. I mean, it's like Michelin stars. How many do you need? 1 star, 3 stars? Is there a big difference?
Virgin piece of foam core to make sure they'll fit on the table.
Virgin piece of foam core.
Table.
Interesting. I didn't have virgin anything in my shop. We were a bunch of sluts in there. We used everything again and again.
Cut.
Hi, welcome back to another reaction video. I'm Michael Joy, and today we're diving into a viewer's request of reviewing another mold maker, Van Tiki Studios, Henrik van... Help me out, Pasha.
Ryzin. R-Y-Z-I-N.
Oh, very formal. I like that. It's like he lives in a castle or something like that. He makes a lot of slip casting molds, and he uses many different materials. And we're going to get into that because slip casting was kind of my thing years ago. Let's jump in. I feel like I'm going to watch the Flintstones cartoon. Old school. Do you know the Flintstones?
I do.
Okay, well. Oh, it's nice to have a shop in the woods.
It is Tiki Technical Tuesday.
Before we even get there, you know, I'm an old guy, so I reminisce. His shop in the woods is fantastic. My shop in the woods was next to a retention pond that used to flood, and so the 3 garage doors that held the tractors would flood, and so sometimes I couldn't work in there. And the other thing is, in the winter, that whole floor froze, and the cement slab, it was like working on an ice skating rink. I just used to stand on mats and big boots, and this guy's living large, man. I should have signed up for earlier classes with him. Let's see.
Episode 3 of the Rhinoceros Hornbill Adventure. In episode 1, we sculpted...
Very festive.
And in episode 2... we made a plaster mold of it. This plaster mold is fantastic. In fact, we could begin slip casting right now.
It's like Alton Brown. Do you know who Alton Brown is?
No idea.
Our aging rig. Okay, stash this in the coldest part of your refrigerator, which most likely will be down in the bottom, which is good because that'll also keep it isolated from other foods. Cross-contamination, always a concern. Leave in place for 24 hours and then change out the paper towel. It'll be kind of wet and gooey.
Food Network, he used to film from inside refrigerators, and it was kind of a catchy film style at the time where things would never be horizon line.
We put a lot of time into
I might need some Dramamine.
And if I drop it...
Oh, he's talking important stuff. I'm going to get serious now.
Lost. This is the only...
So in art school, number 1 is exactly the reason that I got into mold making, is I would make a ceramic piece and then put it in the kiln, and because I knew shit about kilns and glazes, I used to ruin everything. And I thought, I need a mold to have a backup to, you know, not lose my shirt.
Only one in existence. The master sculpture kind of got destroyed or just scuffed up when we made this. So all my eggs are in this one plaster bucket. Secondly, I think about longevity. Take a look at this mold. This is the mold that I use to cast my glaze testers, and
longevity is dodgy. I've seen certain plaster molds wear out fast, and some last for, it seems like, decades. You can even buy some. They do seem to get loaded with deflocculant over time, and if you don't soak out your molds every now and again, that deflocculant builds up in the plaster, and then it doesn't stay as porous. The other thing that happens is sometimes the surface flakes off of the plaster, and there's a formula change in plaster ratios that I'll talk about a little bit later that can help your plaster molds last a long time.
You may not be able to see it in the video, but this interior surface feels rough, almost like sandpaper, and that is because as you cast ceramic slip into these molds, it erodes away the inner surface of the mold. So the molds have a finite lifespan. In fact, I feel that I can...
The molds do have a finite lifetime, and this is why in the hobby industry you'll see a lot of molds that have very kind of smooth, teddy bear, you know, cutesy, crafty things. They're very charming. People cast them and paint them, and it's a lot of fun. But the reason for that smoothness is even when your mold is failing, with these texture fails, they're easy to sponge off on a smooth surface. I've seen a couple of his videos. He has pretty high detail in his castings, and so I think any surface degradation is critical to a guy like this.
See mold degradation after just maybe 20 castings.
Wow, 20.
Castings. It depends on the detail and other factors of the casting, but
His molds look good.
5 is kind of all you can really hope to get out of a mold like the hornbill, and that's not a lot of castings. Not a lot at all.
So
Third thing,
I disagree that 20 castings is all you're going to get out of there. I mean, it depends on your fussiness level. I think ultimately what happens is, myself as a craftsperson, I could get really fussy about some particular detail, but what I notice is other people aren't going to be fussy about it. And so instead of, it sounds bad for a craftsperson to say, but there's a business aspect to this. If I keep myself for a ceramic piece at the highest level and don't accept any flaw, I'm basically going to be paving roads with my broken pottery giveaways, you know, the shards. I always allowed a little bit of wiggle room, and you can do a lot with surface treatment, glaze changes, and there's other things to do with castings that aren't quite perfect. I used to cut up the slip cast pieces and remash them up, and that way the additions looked a little more unique, because actually my interest in art casting was not the precision duplication without flaws. It was having relative duplication and then changing and altering and experimenting. And I don't know that that's his thing, but it was my thing.
is mold math. Now, we went over mold
Oh,
math in the
math.
last episode, but I'm going to do a quick mold math recap, and that is how many castings you can get out of a plaster mold in a day. So
He has good teeth.
one piece a day. It can only do one really because of the
One a day.
of slip casting.
So I would say right there that that's really something he would know, not me. I just used to get, I could flip a mold in art school with my art school day, which was not forever, 3 or 4 times. Now this had a lot to do with how thick of the casting I was making, but I see on the bottom here, this piece of plaster is extremely thin and it's at the bottom of the mold. That is meaning that there's a very small absorption rate at the bottom of the mold, which may have a big footprint. So I feel like if his mold were actually fatter, he could get more castings per day. His mold looks kind of wide-ish, but I don't know from the cavity inside if he's got enough plaster sponge action going on. And if you have a bigger mold, you get more castings.
And it's
Absorption issue.
wick water out of the slip. Go back and watch my How Slip Casting Works episode to learn more about this. So
His shop is clean.
equals 1 casting a day. So if I take my perfectly good hornbill mug mold,
I think he spends as much time on his graphics as he does on the video. It's nice.
I have 5 castings. Now, if we magically had 10 of these molds, in a day I could get 10 castings, and in a week I could have 50.
A 5-day work week? What a dream.
In fact, I think that's worth taking one more step in the mold making process, and that is making.
So I think what's really relevant to calculate is the mold math that he did was about quantities. The mold math that I would do is about time, labor costs, because there is a cost issue to making some duplicate molds even when you're efficient at it, but it also takes up space. So if you're making 10 molds and then all of a sudden that project's done, are you saving those molds or are you striking them? I used to save my molds as long as possible, and I could go on and on about how I don't like that the art world makes a valuation call on the size of your edition. So if you have an edition of 100 units and then after that they say, oh, you're devalued, but look at the best-selling authors on the New York Times. I mean, they're celebrated for selling millions. Musicians went platinum, went gold. They're celebrated for their volume, but an artist has to eat shit on this, and I think it's a crock. So the math that I would do is say, how much is it really costing him to make these molds versus his edition size? And that's something that, it's not my math, it's his.
A flexible silicone mold of this plaster mold. That's right, we're making a mold of a mold today. Let's get to it. The very first step is a lot of very careful measuring. I took a little
Oh my God.
here and plotted out the exact
This guy's precision. To me, I'll call it fussy, but with mold maker love. I never used to take measurements like this for a mold, a master mold like that. I would have a work board, I'd put the mold down, I'd throw some spacers on the side, maybe an inch, depending on how tall, and then I'd build a flexible box around it. Sorry, flexible is not the right word, an adjustable mold box around it. He goes a different route, but this is a lot of thinking. I was doing. I was desperate.
Inch or between a half an inch to an inch on each side of the mold. And I want to make sure I have height above the mold box too. I want to make sure that the silicone.
What happens is when you see all this beautiful craftsmanship quality stuff, I think there's an aspect that is easy to geek out on and just appreciate it. But there's another aspect of it that it makes mold making look overwhelming. And it really isn't overwhelming. You can dive right in, and this is what we're going to be doing, is showing some simple, I used to call it mad dash mold making. You know, you just get through it and it's fine. But this is laborious.
Cone will flow over the top of these plaster pieces and give me a good half inch to an inch on the top section as well. I put everything down carefully, lots of math, and then we're ready for the next step. Okay, now that I've done all the careful measurements, I have...
To me, it's like overthinking a haircut. You know, to me, I'd be like, well, I kind of go in with a plan and hit me with the number 4s and stuff like this. And if it's good, that's great. But if it wasn't so good, my hair will grow back. I'm much more casual in my approach. Now, especially when it's my own work. For clients, different story.
Scoured throughout the workshop to find all of the plywood that I can to amass enough wood to make these boxes.
So this is another, I'm choking this down because I haven't critiqued Henrik, yeah, before, and I feel that his pleasure in the process is only pushing people to think it's further and further away. It's like, oh, F-stick, now I need a wood shop to deal with this. You don't. There's some other tools that are very simple. These are his preferences, but they're not rules of mold making. You can be very successful with other techniques. It's like driving to a destination, right? There's a scenic route, there's the short route, you get 3 choices on GPS. It's like that with mold making, but more than 3 choices.
As you are probably aware, plywood is hard to come by right now, and it's very expensive.
Oh, COVID.
Every little bit that I have here in the studio.
His plywood's really nice too. It looks like birch. It's some coin.
Anymore. I think that I've got enough. Now it is pouring down rain outside. I'm not going to be able to set up the camera and cut this and keep everything dry at the same time. So hopefully, through the magic of it,
it's a lot of talk about a piece of plywood.
Cut to a bunch of finished mold boxes, or at least me assembling them right about now.
Oh, good.
Ta-da! Once I had all the pieces cut,
his shop has no dust.
My old and steady friend, the Craig jig tools.
Kind of strikes me as the type of guy who would wash his feet before he went to bed. Very.
It's not a bad thing.
No, it's not. I mean, depending on where you live, right? But if your house is, anyways. He just seems very particular. I mean, look at this jig. Looks like it's never been used. It's got this vacuum. I mean, everything is new.
Cleaned it for the video, Michael.
Is it? Oh,
yeah,
man.
I'm sure.
So this is a pocket hole drilling jig.
It's nice.
Quickly join thin pieces.
But look at the tools he's using.
Strong, very low.
It sucks in the dust right away.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Boxes.
Yeah, I do like that.
All together using either.
But I wouldn't build a box like this at all. I wouldn't need these tools.
Or I've got these fancy.
I would use my hands.
Right angle. 4
pieces of acrylic, some clay, and 4 clamps. Scrub-a-dub-dub. Mad dash mold making. We just need to get them configured around because the mold is for us. Tricky one today. Yes, the other day you mastered it so fast.
Hang on. There you go.
Okay.
I want to keep everything really square.
And I would have that box knocked out in 10 minutes.
It's got like locks and everything.
It's beautiful, right?
I mean, it's cool.
Hearing protection. I mean, come on, this guy's gonna live to be 100. Everything.
100 everything.
I like it.
All right, we've got our mold boxes finished finally. Now, you don't need to get this fancy square edge.
It's beautiful though.
Tool. You can make these just fine. They don't have to be perfectly square. Why am I putting all this time into it? Well, it's what I do for a living, and I want these things to be great. These are going to keep my mold casting well. If these are really...
There's so many tricks that you can pick up on that will alleviate the fussiness. And although there's absolutely nothing wrong with his fussiness, that pressure that I had with clients was always exceeded than I wanted to do a good job. I remember that sometimes in jobs I would just go and go and go, adding more and more quality, but the price didn't go up. I had already bid the job, but it was just my internal madness that wanted to make it perfect and beautiful and this, that. And I was just like, every step towards perfection is costing me, you know, another $20, another $20, another $20. And I got to the point where I thought my good enough was better than someone else's best. And I just had to realize that. It sounds kind of arrogant, but in every craft that a person becomes a master of, I don't know. I mean, it's like Michelin stars. How many do you need? 1 star, 3 stars? Is there a big difference?
Produce well-made molds. So yeah, this is an investment. Like I always say, this is an investment in my future and in this mug's future. Now, speaking of,
he's not wrong.
It's late in the day, and I don't want to start pouring silicone now. I'm just way too exhausted. So we're going to come back tomorrow and be fresh and be re-energized, and we will pour our silicone, and then we can start casting plaster.
It's interesting. We always poured silicone at the end of the day. We would prep, and then I see why he had to build these boxes and things. But again, if you didn't have to build those boxes, everything would be ready to pour that day. So he's pushed out a whole nother day here for reasons that I understand, but
okay,
that's good. Okay.
Back.
So Pasha's saying, you know, hey, he is making money, he is monetizing the videos, and I think this is fantastic. I didn't have the opportunity to do that when I was in my various shops. I made a joke in another video. I think a guy was making cement tables, and he was filming using a saw to cut. It was basically like cleaning his ear, you know. It felt like to me, and I'm like, that's content? I guess so, you know, you stretch it out. But I see in him the pleasure of the build. It's like the RTA guy. They just love designing so much that it's not so much about my slant of the economics of running mold shops as much as it's like, hey man, I'm doing what I love. I'm just doing it beautiful because I am.
Boxes. Something I wanted to mention is while it was raining and I couldn't set up the camera,
Yeah, you gotta take notes on boxes if you build them.
onto the boxes and sanded them back so that the wood
This is 4 boxes, but imagine you have 100 boxes in the shop. It gets
information about which mold each box is for, because they can get separated from the molds once you're in the casting process, and you want to remember which one is which. I also put these little marks on each side of it so I can remember what order the boxes were assembled. In case I have to disassemble one of these boxes and then put it back together, I can put it back together exactly how it was on the day that the silicone was poured. After we have done all the marking, it's time to put on a final coat of our favorite stuff, mold soap. I put a coat on the inside of all of the wooden boxes.
Okay, just to beat a dead horse, his box building is taking as much concern as making the whole mold. Again, my difference in work style is it doesn't make it better, it just means that we have different cars.
Boxes and on the edges, anywhere that silicone might touch to help release the silicone.
I thought you'd have made a car joke there.
Last but not least, we lay out
Pasha loves cars.
a virgin piece of foam core to make sure they'll fit on the table.
Virgin piece of foam core.
That table
Interesting.
absolutely level. This is critical.
I didn't have virgin anything in my shop. We
Upside down. The arrows are
were a bunch of sluts in there. We used everything again and again.
Cut.
inverted for this part. They're upside down now, but that's because we're going to be pouring them upside down.
It's got the mold maker scruff.
You'll just have to watch how this unfolds, and then hopefully you'll understand. Okay, so once I've got everything laid out, I pencil in the outlines of where things are going to go, and I actually go ahead and hot glue down the plaster molds to keep them from shifting around while the mold boxes are being...
So this is the type of thing where his video is here, and he has exactly what he's showing, and he gets through it very successfully. I'm a parallel universe in this regard. I would have put each plaster section on its own workboard. I would have drilled some holes in the workboard to vent the plaster, because plaster can kind of make some silicone bubble depending on the humidity content of the plaster. We've seen that in some other videos. He's doing his whole table at one time. I don't like being locked down on a table. I like being able to move things around and level them individually. And plus, if you have a problem with one mold piece, it spills out into everything else. You cannot kind of save one child. You gotta, it's all of them.
Hang on, we got a visitor.
Nice. I miss that about working in the country.
Love him. Okay, back to work.
Oculus, he's a science guy, huh? Oculus mule deer miss.
Really hot glue all of the individual plaster mold pieces to the foam core, and then once they're all secure, I go through and actually hot glue down the boxes around them. Basically, I want to make sure
his tables are at a good height.
They will not move, and that they
That's
will
nice.
Not necessarily watertight, but silicone tight.
Man, everybody on the internet uses hot glue. I almost never used it.
Too crazy fighting leaks.
I must have missed out.
Because the silicone that I use sets very quickly, and it's very viscous, it's very thick. Now, Depends on what kind of silicone you're using, how careful you've got to be about patching leaks.
The silicone is really nice to work with. It does come with a price tag. My block molds of my master block molds, I used to make out of urethane. I don't remember what it was. I mean, it was so many, it was like 20 years ago. I think it was 7440, I think it was a Polytech product, and it was durable, and those block molds just would last. I mean, I had that around for like the 20 years that I made it. I kept it around.
Some silicones are very fluid and they take a long time to cure, like they might take 24 hours to cure. When that's the case, that silicone has a lot of time to find its way out through any little leaks you might have in your mold, any cracks or crevices. So make your molds as watertight.
This is a tight shot.
The silicone you're using demands. Speaking of silicone, this is what we're using. I guess I should have done it this way. We're using Rebound 40. It works fantastic for me.
Never used it.
Don't just run out and use it because I am using it. Get little samplers, get little test packets. Make sure the silicone works for the project that you are going to use it.
This is very valuable advice.
Buy a ton of it because
Don't buy a lot until you try it.
and you want to make sure you've got the rubber that works for you. And since the silicone is so expensive, you want to make sure you get just the amount that you need. How do I know how much to get? I don't. Now you can
Me either.
calculate volumes and whatnot, but that means that I've got to make these molds, then measure volumes. And I wanted to have the silicone already ordered, so I kind of guesstimated what I need. And then I also have this.
Okay, now we're talking.
Candy, it is a carefully cut
I'll let him go forward and I'll tell you how we used to recycle.
up old mold from a mug that has been retired. Done, I take the silicone master molds and I cut them all up like this. Because believe it or not, you can recycle them in new molds. Okay, I think we are all set up and ready to go. I have got a ladder. I've got my recycled silicone bits, craft paper on the floor for spills. I've got stir sticks, a ton of buckets, and all of my silicone rubber ready to open. Okay, I'm gonna go for
Good thing he's not Scottish.
video.
Scotland has a super quirky law. When men wear kilts, they are forbidden to wear underwear beneath them. Moreover, if a Scottish woman wants to take pleasure in the scenery underneath, the man cannot.
I'm gonna be able to shoot because once you start mixing this stuff, you don't want to mess around. So I'll try to get a couple of shots in between buckets. I don't think I'm gonna use all 3-gallon kits. Hopefully I just need to use 2, but it's nice to know that I've got the 3rd just in case I need it. I definitely will be using a whole bunch of that cut up silicone that I have.
That's a lot of talking.
Fill in extra space.
I mean, I'm a talker and this is a lot of talking.
Yes.
Okay,
Birkenstock cloth,
I don't like mixing silicone on the ground.
and they can get very dirty without room.
I have a table and carts that are set for mixing heights.
2 lines. One is the halfway point for the A side, and one is the mark for the B side when I mix these. And since they're translucent, I can see the marks I put on the outside through the inside. I like to put the blue side in first.
Doesn't matter.
It's a little more, well, I guess I should say it is a little less viscous.
Oh, interesting. So when you pour your silicone like that, and then you just bring the bucket back, you get it everywhere. When you're pouring, you just gotta strike it with your mixing stick or a spatula so that it just doesn't dribble over the edge, because those dribbles just don't go away. He's got some on the floor here. No big deal, but save yourself.
Nicer, and I find it makes it easier to mix if you put the less viscous half in before the thicker half. Now this is mixed 1-to-1 by volume, which is very nice, and that's why I can just follow the lines I put on the bucket instead of
Stir well before using.
as I do it. And you can see I've already got some silicone on the floor, and that is why I like to put the craft paper down. Because
That was usually a urethane thing, not a silicone thing.
okay, let's talk about mixing. First of all, you do not
He's got a good strong mixing stick. Now he's on a chair, that's nice.
hardware store, those will
I would power mix this for sure. And what you have to be careful about with power mixing is there's these paint mixers that there's these metal blades. Although they mix great and they're cheap, those the metal blade will chew up your bucket. If you hit it with side, it gets the side of the bucket and it'll spit in pieces of plastic. It's just not desirable. So if you get a plastic mixing bit for silicone, then make sure it is not super sharp so it doesn't cut up your bucket. The other thing is if you do use that metal inexpensive mixing bit, don't clean it at the end. Let some silicone build up on that end, and that will act as its own bumper for mixing your next layers of silicone. When it builds up too thick, eventually you can just cut it off because it doesn't stick to the blade and start over. Hand mixing is actually pretty exhausting.
Break trying to mix a super
Not
thick
everybody-
viscous substance
yes, sir.
like this silicone. I am using a piece of 1/2-inch plywood and
When you're power mixing, don't you introduce the bubbles into the mixture?
Oh, good point. Yeah, I have basic assumptions. I have vacuum chambers, but he's mixing in air bubbles here too. The thing is if you're going to be pouring this amount of silicone, you should get a vacuum chamber. I mean, the amount of silicone that he's pouring is I don't know what, $400, $500, $600 easy, and a vacuum chamber is not too expensive, especially if he does this again and again. So
you mix and then you vacuum chamber it, so you get rid of all the bubbles.
A and B, power mix, throw it in the chamber. I would have mixed in a 5-gallon sort of a Home Depot bucket, if you will, and then throw that into the vacuum chamber. A lot of vacuum chambers people buy and they're not big enough. We made vacuum chambers, we'll show a picture of it, that it's this big kitchen multi-quart thing, and then I had an acrylic guy cut a top and we dropped the valve in it that way. But that way it was big enough for me to put a 5-gallon pail inside and I could degas big molds.
How long, quickly, sorry, another question. How long does it take to use a vacuum chamber to get rid of all the bubbles in the silicone?
It relates to the power of your vacuum pump, how fast it can evacuate the big chamber. So if you have a small amount of silicone and you de-air it in a big chamber, it's going to take a little longer. This is why the vacuums that we use are not the little high volume, I don't know what they call the loud ones, I don't know what they are. We use the Welch Duo-Seal. It was more of an industrial belt-driven vacuum pump, a 1404. We used to pick them up on eBay. They were maybe at the time $1,000, which sounds like a lot, but they would move a lot of air fast. So let's just say, how long did it take me? It would take about 5 minutes for the chamber to get down to a low pressure. Then it would be, the material would rise and then it would collapse and it would go another 2 minutes. So you weren't with the vacuum chamber for more than 8 or 9 minutes. Definitely.
Okay, now, if you have a very fast setting silicone, that becomes a problem because that could be the time when the silicone starts setting and you don't want to pour it when it's already starting to set, correct?
Yes, and I didn't want to criticize his choice, but I would not have chosen a fast setting silicone.
Okay.
Not for a master mold. There's no need. He's going to let them sit overnight anyways. So I would choose a longer pot life and just kind of have a cup of tea while I'm doing it. Good questions, Posh.
Cheers to that.
You've edited a lot of mold making videos. You're up there.
I have, I certainly have.
it works really well. Now, I have some artist friends who are
He's doing everything right here when you're mixing by hand.
and it seems to work really well. So feel free to experiment. And if you've got tips, let me know.
Okay.
Now,
The only thing that I would do different, if I was hand mixing, I would take this amount after he's what I would call first mix, then I would flip the pail and I would dump it all into another pail, empty and clean, and then I would nag the pail with a spatula and get in there and bring all the extra material off the walls because he's scraping the walls, but the bottom is not really getting the love. You gotta turn that batch, especially with a volume of more than a few inches in there.
critical thing here is I am counting in my head 60 seconds. I'm doing a 1-100, 2-100, 3-100, and I'm only giving myself 60 seconds to mix this. Secondly, I am scraping the sides as I go. You want to make sure that you scrape the bottom and the sides so you don't have any
He's doing great.
silicone on the edge. The nice thing about this is it's 2 colors.
He's done this a lot because it takes time to get confident with this amount of money in the bucket.
Well, now this is the bit that's going to look a little crazy. Yes, I'm standing up on a ladder to do this. This is a way of getting all the air bubbles out of the...
So this is another thing that makes mold making look difficult. If you're set up for it right, you don't have to do this. Not everybody wants to be on a ladder, for one. This guy's young and spry, but he's got clogs on. I would never be on a ladder in clogs. It's just no bueno. And but what he's doing with the needling technique is absolutely apropos. The thing is if he had a vacuum chamber, he wouldn't need the ladder. He wouldn't need to be up there, and he wouldn't be doing that overextended reach. He looks like he's in good shape, but not everybody that mold makes is. I mean, I passed my prime with that, so.
As I pour it, I'm pouring in a very thin stream, which supposedly will burst all the bubbles. Maybe it's an urban myth.
So the other thing that's happening right now is if he hadn't turned the batch into another bucket and he's taking the last residual bit, he can be scraping uncured material into the mold form. He's not because he did a good job at it, but someone else doing it for the first time might not realize that they're bringing in uncatalyzed silicone into their master mold. And a master mold is the last place you want to have uncatalyzed silicone.
I don't know, but it works really well for me. Once I've gotten all the critical surfaces of the mold covered, I'm going to go in and start adding some filler in order to save my
Let me play this.
silicone costs. So I just sprinkle some of this in, being careful not to drop it on the studio floor. You may be asking yourself, am I?
So we used to recycle silicone a lot, but would do it a little bit differently. Our silicone was ground in an industrial grinder. I know that's a step away from what people have. It took me a long time to get to that. And chunking like this can take some time too. It's very tedious. But if you have somebody that's good with a knife, you're okay. If I knew that I was going to recycle in this method in advance, I would have mixed up a very small amount of silicone. I would have glazed the surface of the plaster, let it set, and then I would have loaded up with a bunch of the chunks. And that way the glaze layer, even if I did two, creates a barrier between the virgin material and the chunkages. And that way you can really load in a lot of recycled material. The industrial way that I recycled was I took the regrind, I would throw it into the pre-mixed A and B parts, and I would mix it like oatmeal right there and then I would pour this big lumpy batch. And it was a little trickier. Not everybody can do that.
Holding the camera with one hand, adding this with the other while pouring a very expensive material? Yes, I am. Is it stressful? You bet, but it's exciting too. I went ahead and poured a second batch.
So he's
recycled chunks.
It's good that it's getting used up, but it's not a big savings. I like that he's doing it though.
Silicone sound weird?
It's pretty.
I'm being extra careful to get this silicone right to the tippy top of the plywood mold box. It's really important for when we flip these over that the silicone level is right at the edge and that your tabletop is level. This is why I kept saying level.
What I don't know is how high above the plaster he poured. In a master mold, if you just have a little hilltop, you don't have to go an inch above it. I would go not much more than a quarter inch above the high point just to reduce the amount of material, because covering a high point like this over an area like this becomes very expensive. You can blow another 60, 80 bucks.
Your tabletop before you pour the silicone, or at least I think I said it once. Well, I'm saying it again now because it is very important. You want this silicone?
You can see the marbling of the silicone right there, which kind of makes, you can tell that it's not power mixed.
After several more batches of silicone, I was able to fill up every single
Wow, that's a lot of material.
Oh, so glad that is done. It is always stressful to pour silicone. It's such an expensive material, and you have such limited time to do it. This is going to sit here over.
There's a point in which the material doesn't become expensive because it's correctly built into the cost of the project, and the risk factor is minimized because you've done it a few times and you're not wasting ingredients. But at the beginning, this is a lot of casabas.
Overnight, and tomorrow morning we will pop them open, and then we get to cast our first production.
So he has a forest studio, and that means that he's going to have to heat his shop overnight in order to keep the temperature warm in there. Otherwise, the silicone won't cure. Some people don't find out until a little longer that cold rooms reduce the cure time. And the other thing is because he's welded his boards.
Cold rooms reduce?
Sorry, I said it backwards. Cold rooms extend the amount of cure time. And since he has mounted everything to a table, not a work board, even if he's in the summer, he can't take it outside and put it in the heat. He's got to control the climate in his shop. It's a small thing, but important depending on certain climates. It could take, in my cold shop, it would take 2 or 3 days to cure, and sometimes I just have to bring it indoors. But I was working in freezing conditions. It was stupid.
Production plaster mold.
Final touches. Oh, he matches.
It has set. Always a great
He's going to Miami.
next day and find the silicone completely firmly set. Now, full disclosure, I did check back on the molds, like just a mere 20 minutes after I poured it to just do a little touch test, and it already was firming up. Like I said, this
Wow, that's a short pot life.
rather quickly. Now, before I start peeling these things apart, I want to just address the little chunks that I drop to the silicone. Sometimes they will.
Yeah, what happens is he's got some larger chunkages. Remember, in my recycling dialogue, we had oatmeal, and so the back would be kind of bumpy, which is not great because it can throw your mold out of torque alignment. I would just take one of those long razor blades from one of the extended utility blades, and I would just sort of shave it across the back. He only needs to nip a few. I would have just dealt with it when it was wet and sort of pushed everything with a straw underwater, so to speak.
Up, and you'll see they just kind of distort the surface just a little bit.
Because now it's an extra
I'm
step.
going to go ahead and trim those high areas away, because when I flip these over and cast them, I don't want these little high areas to distort the mold in any way whatsoever. Am I being overly cautious?
Yes.
Maybe. But you know what? That's
But that's how he rolls. He's the overly cautious guy. That's okay.
really, really well.
It's his money.
With that out of the way, it's time for the dessert of silicone mold making, and that is beveling the edges. We do this because it is oh so satisfying.
It is so satisfying, but I don't think you need to do it with the mold box because the mold box is creating the stability. It's just a, you know, it's like rubbing your feet. It's kind of nice
to do, and it helps the molds
I don't know.
slide back into their plywood jackets. I like to.
Oh, so he's not wrong about that. That's a really good point. In the RTA mold that we're going to talk about later today in another video, it's really important to create a texture on the side of a mold box to reduce the vacuum when resetting. And so in a sense, his cutting I stand corrected. He knows more than I do in this instance because he did the right thing here.
Top parts of the molds before I even take them out of the plywood boxes. It just makes it easier, and it
right.
spreads out the joy of
Nice job.
trimming and beveling.
Henrik!
Once the tops are beveled, it is time to break out the muscles
Boom.
and pry all the
Yeah,
pieces off of the
that's a lot of
molds,
pressure.
holding them down. And
You gotta be careful.
oh, did I just drop that? I did drop it, and this is a perfect example of why we.
If he was on a work board, he could have taken it to a place that was maybe at a different level and he could have gotten some leverage or a tool under there. But because he's welded onto the table, he doesn't have a lot of space between the molds. It's a small thing. Hey, shops are shops. You got the space you got, but it's a thought.
Silicone master molds. I can drop it on the floor without fear of it exploding and making it impossible for me to do any future castings.
I think he'll survive.
Silicone, everything is fine, and I went ahead and just pried the rest of the mold boxes and the freshly poured silicone off of the
So that foam cord is trash now,
ready for a whole nother round of
and you got to peel it off the back. No, not a big deal.
the molds flipped. Now remember, they're actually right side up now. I go through and I bevel the inner edge first, the edge that is the plaster.
Did you do this at the shop? Did you ever do this?
I switch and do all of the outer.
Trimming? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've done trimming.
Okay, this bit is important. Now we have arrows on here so you know which way is up, but we also want to make sure that when we take this out of the mold, we remember what direction we have to put this silicone back into it. So I'm going to put a little notch right here in the silicone and then put a little Sharpie mark on
Yeah, we used to do orientation.
put this
You mark it, you nip it,
the wood in the proper orientation.
but I'd be done by now.
Be alarmed, this little notch I'm cutting out of the silicone will
He's doing a lot. He's doing the camera.
Anyway.
He's got to think about what he's saying.
help me put this mold back to
I mean, it's easy for me to just go, oh, it's too slow. But really,
top and bottom, and our little.
I never had to worry about making content.
It's time to.
Until now.
But that's why we got you, Posh.
I do this using the Craig.
Keep me out of the fire.
Back them out, and then I kind of just use very gently this paint scraper to just kind of pry the wood away from the silicone. The silicone does not stick to the wood because of the mold release we use.
Yeah, that was smart, the mold release.
Grab that I have to just kind of break this little seal.
Using butter knives is easier though. They're a bit sturdier.
Yeah,
and
they
they
are.
don't cut into the mold. And this thing could cut it into it.
Flip the mold over.
Yeah, those
You're not
mud knives are
careful.
sharp.
Yeah.
Do the work of pulling the plaster out of the silicone.
Okay, he's got it. Huzzah. It's a couple $100.
If you remember when we poured the plaster mold
Yeah, this is a non-issue.
thick, and I was worried about catching some bubbles. It ends up I did, but look, we can pluck the bubbles
Yeah, it's very satisfying.
using some forceps, and this means
But what if it like rips?
future plastic
It won't.
castings. And now that the silicone is out, we can
Yep.
Close up.
corners up.
Oh yeah.
This looks like some brittle
Butter.
silicone. The way it cuts like that.
Butter.
Butter.
I love that.
Do you?
I did that.
But with scissors, you didn't use the
I did
knives,
it. I
did
did
you?
with scissors. Yeah.
Okay. I'd be like, ooh.
Once I've beveled the edges, it's time for the mold's first bath. I take it over to the sink and get a thorough
Okay.
scrubbing using
Now it's my turn to be fussy. I wouldn't use any scouring surfaces in a silicone mold. Fresh silicone is pretty soft, let alone any silicone actually, and you can dull the surface. He doesn't have a shiny surface, but if this silicone mold had a shiny surface and he's taken a scrub brush or a scrub sponge to it, you will dull the surface of it. So I would have just used something soft, natural sponge and a little soapy water.
Dish soap and a bristle brush to remove any old mold soap, any plaster residue, anything at all really.
That's a good idea.
Of this silicone surface and the plaster when we start to cast our production molds.
Yep.
So here it is, this Silicone Master, a perfect silicone reproduction of our original monster clay rhinoceros hornbill. And thanks to the little notch that we put into the silicone, it makes it easy to orient and slide into its plywood home.
Broke the vacuum. Well done.
We did it! We went from the sculpture to Silicone Master molds. What's next from here? Well, I'm going to cast a bunch of production molds out of plaster. I think I'm going to make 10 molds so I can cast 10 skulls a day. That's the goal, but we're going to leave that for the next episode of Tiki Technical Tuesday. I will see you then.
He's got a whole day for himself. All right, what do we have about Henrik? I would say the guy gets 2 high fives on this. He was very clean, very precise. He looked out for himself, he was safe, and he absolutely knew where he was going on each step forward. And it was a risky, expensive pour. Maybe his first time, maybe his not. I don't know what the videos, but I think he did a great job. Remember, my comments, if I didn't comment a different way than what he already did, then it would kind of be like, well, it's just another ham sandwich, right? We're both serving ham. I think that the things that I offer really are shop sensitive. If you have the motivations that I had, which I was watching the hours, watching the dollars, then some of my stuff is more important than in the pleasure build that he has here. So I like what he did. We're gonna see what he uses these plaster molds for. Maybe there's some more tips and tricks coming up. So nice job, Henrik, and I like the shoes. Take care.
Virgin piece of foam core to make sure they'll fit on the table.
Virgin piece of foam core.
That table.
Interesting. I didn't have virgin anything in my shop. We're a bunch of sluts in there. We used everything again and again.
Cut.